Welcome to our Mary Greeley Primetime Live presentation, The Aging Brain. Prevention is the best medicine. I'm Vicki Newell and I manage the Primetime Live program here at Mary Greeley Medical Center. As a reminder, if you'd like more information about Primetime Alive, our programs, or how to join, you can go to mgmc.org/PTA. Our presenter today is Dr. Selden Spencer. Dr. Spencer received his bachelor's degree from Allegheny College in Pennsylvania and his medical degree from the University of North Dakota School of Medicine. He completed fellowships at the University of Iowa and at Washington University in St. Louis. Dr. Spencer joined McFarland Clinic's Neurology Department in 1990. Please welcome Dr. Spencer.
Thank you very much, Vicki, and thank you all for attending. I know you hear it every time, but it's kind of weird not being able to see your face, and I hope you appreciate that this is a great opportunity for us to get together and think about issues that are important to our health and the health of our neighbors. Vicki approached me 3 or 4 months ago, and thanks to Vicki and Tim Extra for getting this all set up, but she approached me several months ago about, hey, would you want to talk about something about the brain? And okay. Then this launched into this product that we agreed upon, which is trying to talk about the brain as it gets older. And I think all of us are concerned about that. I want to start off with a disclaimer. I'm supposed to have a disclaimer. I am not sponsored by any drug company, but the disclaimer that I really want to emphasize right at the beginning is that I'm giving you my opinion. I don't think anything I'm sharing with you is accepted dogma. I don't think anything I'm giving you is hazardous to your health, but there's controversy, and I will point the controversy out as we go along. But as Stalin or Lenin or somebody once said, when you give a talk, you tell people what you want them to know first off, and then during the talk, you tell them what you want them to know, and then at the end of the talk, you tell them what you want them to know. So this is my tribute to Stalin, which is the basics. From my perspective, there are 5 things that are very important for maintaining brain health. We believe, and I can document, I hope, aerobic activity will improve brain health. Sleep is critical for clearance of debris, and the Mediterranean diet, as far as what you're going to eat, is beneficial. Positive social activity is healthy for the brain. And weightlifting resistance efforts are also beneficial for the brain. And I'll try to elaborate why that's the case as I go along. That's the basic message. And I thought, well, maybe I should give you a memnotic, right? And so the memnotic I came up with was WAMS: weights, aerobic, Mediterranean, sleep, and social activity, but now the more I think about it, SWAMs might be better. But anyway, you can play with that as you wish. And I know this is almost a giveaway, but I want to start with a riddle. So you can sit at home and wonder about this, and I'm going to give you the answer very quickly. But at any rate, what is the one thing that goes up and never comes down? Smoke? Balloons? No, it's your age. Your age always goes up. It does not go down. That's the best I can do for jokes. Okay, so let's see now. Tim, should I hit the buttons here? Is that the right way to go? I think so. Nope. How about this? Huh. There we go. Okay, so why does the brain age and what does it look like? So clearly, and this is, again, think about a bell-shaped curve. I just looked at an article, and it's, putting this thing together has been a little bit of a nightmare because every time I get another journal, there's an article about, well, these are 100-year-olds that have perfectly normal cognitive function. We're talking about a bell-shaped curve. There are people that do very poorly, as you well know, get very bad in their 50s, and there are some people that do great all the way to their hundreds. The vast majority of us are somewhere in the middle. So what I'm saying here about the brain age is about the bell-shaped curve, the middle. So both loss of gray matter and white matter in the brain is happening, and it's very individual. It's unique. But the two things of the brain, the areas of the brain that clearly shrink on almost everybody are the frontal lobe and the temporal lobe. And there is a process at play where the brain reorganizes to compensate for this loss of tissue and control. The three biggies, and I will repeat this many, many times. I don't know, where should I be looking, Vicki? Ah, there we go. Okay, I'll look at the camera in the monitor. Okay, the three things that we're going to come back to over and over again, which we have been shown over and over deteriorate for people as they get older, is one, processing speed, and I'll tell you more about that. Episodic memory goes away, and executive control goes away. Other memory and cognitive abilities do not have the same sacrifice, and we'll talk about that as we go along. And I believe that this decline can be moderated, and there are various compensatory ways that we can address that and try to get it done. But I want to talk about aging a little bit in general, talk about what is the contribution from genetics, and on a cellular basis, what happens. And this is all basic biology. You know, you have DNA, the DNA begins to fall apart as you get older. And as your cell is consuming glucose and oxygen, you develop free radicals. Free radicals are chemical spin-offs that are damaging potentially to the cell. And so what's for dinner? You know, it's one of those things. And we'll talk about this as we get into it a little bit more. So let's talk about the genetic part. And the part that I think is always fascinating to people is that there is this disease called progeria, and it's hard to call it a disease. There's only about 400 cases that have been reported, but it's premature aging, and I think many of you may have seen something along the way that speaks to that phenomenon. And there's a chromosomal defect for this lamin A, and I don't know what that means, but if you have that genetic defect, you will get old quickly and die quickly. In animal studies, looking for animals that live longer than another, the FOXO3 gene appears to be very important. But in general, for all of us, our cells will divide, and at some point the cells will stop dividing, and at that point they die. And I think the whole process of cell death and aging is very important, trying to figure that out. However, and I'll talk about this in more detail, 50 to 70 divisions of every cell, whether it's a neuron or your skin or your eyebrow, that's going to happen. And the telomere, and we'll talk about that, is what's key. Sort of hidden in all of this stuff is we're in the area of genetic manipulation, let's be honest. And the fact that we could potentially modify the degradation of telomeres and maybe have more than 50 or 70 divisions per cell is looming in front of us. Now, as I said, the cells will die, and you will have a programmed genetic phenomenon called apoptosis. And but sometimes other things and weird things happen to the cell that is no longer able to divide. So this is a picture of progeria. This is an unfortunate young man who's now dead. They usually are born and look very old when they're born, and they usually die by age 15 or 20. That's his mother. And this is a clear-cut genetic defect. So genes do play a role in aging, but I'm not sure that apart from the scary world of gene manipulation that we should contemplate that as being an intervention that would make any difference to the aging process. There are other variations on progeria, but I just wanted to show a slide of that. And now the telomeres. So you have DNA, and at the very end, just like the tail of your shoelace, is what's called the telomere. And the cell can divide, and every time the cell divides, the DNA unravels and then produces another one. Every time it does that, the telomere, the tail end, shrinks a little bit more. And when that gets to the very end, you no longer have cell division. And that seems to be the very limiting part of cell division. There is a gene, an enzyme, telomerase, which can be modified to slow down this damage or replace this loss of the telomere. Again, another spooky idea that you can perhaps keep the cell dividing infinitely. So, stem cells, gene therapy, immortality. I just love this conversation, but at any rate, some animals are thought to be immortal, namely urchins and lobsters. But it's better to say that they have cells that no longer divide but don't die off. They don't do apoptosis. There are some creatures that have amazing stem cells, allowing them to produce any kind of tissue they need. And of course, as I've alluded to several times, you can always play around with stem cells and gene therapy. We're seeing it right now with CRISPR and sickle cell anemia. You know, we can correct genetic defects, and this may be something that'll be applied to the whole phenomenon of aging at some point. So what are senescent cells? Okay, I already talked about a normal cell. You got your DNA there, you got liposomes, all kinds of mitochondria, good things in there to make that cell work. And then they divide, and they get to a certain point, and the telomere says, you're not dividing anymore. And they say, okay, let's do the DNA program of apoptosis. And the cell mechanically dissolves. This same genetic program is what afflicts cells in the lung, for instance, that get a bad infection. The cell kind of just gives up, okay, we're apoptotic. However, there's another mechanism which can occur, which is senescence. They can choose not to do apoptosis, but develop this senescent cell, which is what I'm going to talk about. And as I was telling Vicki, this whole talk, I could think of each one of these subjects to fill an hour to talk about. They're very interesting problems. And of course, another possibility is you can say, screw it, I'm going to be a cancer cell. I'm going to just keep dividing like crazy. Forget the telomere. So let's talk about senescent cells, and I just draw your attention to the side over here to the right. As a baby, you got a couple blue senescent cells, but as you get older, you get more and more and more senescent cells. So you got a normal cell, and the normal cell gets old, and the telomere gets bad, or the gene itself, or the DNA itself gets screwed up, or the mitochondria doesn't work. Anyway, the cell isn't working very well, and it can become apoptotic, or it can become a senescent cell. And the senescent cells, as you get a lot of them, can cause some problems. So anyway, as you see over here to the right, there's always an interest about maybe we need to just kill off a lot of these senescent cells. So here you have oxidative stress, chemotherapy, telomere shortening, whatever. You get these blue ones. They are senescent cells, and they look like this. They're big, they're not normal, and they produce a lot of junk, which basically creates an extracellular matrix which is highly inflammatory and very tumor permissive. Things like the interleukins 6 and 8 are very pro-inflammatory, and you've heard the term many, many times about inflammaging. We kind of look upon aging as somewhat of an inflammatory process. All right, so this is my artistic gift here, senescent cells as angry and ineffective. This is where I wanted to talk about the lymphocytes in our white blood cells. I'm obviously going to focus on neurons and oligodendrocytes and brain cells, but I just am just so attracted, have been for years, that one of the senescent cells that we encounter are lymphocytes, which become old and ineffective and senescent. And not only do they do a terrible job at fighting off infection and participating in adaptive immunology, they also are very effective at telling the bone marrow not to produce any new lymphocytes. And so this is my gift. Did anybody get the metaphor? Get an old white cell yelling and screaming and keeping young people away. I hope I didn't offend anybody, but that's the idea. Okay, so we're done with genes, and we've talked about cells, and we're going to go to the macro part of the talk, which is basically about the brain as an organ and parts of that organ shrinking. So as I said before, I don't know why, but the frontal lobe shrinks. And this makes great sense because, as I said, there's three things that go bad as the brain gets old. One is processing speed goes down, episodic memory goes down, and executive control goes down. Guess what? The frontal lobe is responsible for executive control, and I'll talk more about that. But the basic idea is as you lose your frontal lobe, you're not able to focus as well on attention or on activities. We can advertise that we're multitasking, but the fact is you can't stay on target. So now, time for a little joke. You ready? The pastor says to Ole, Ole, you ought to think about the hereafter a little bit more. Ole looks at the pastor. Pastor, every time I go into a room, I'm asking, what am I here after? So the idea is we have all experienced that we're doing something and that type of thing. That's a frontal lobe phenomenon. We don't have the targeted razor-focused effort in our activities. Okay, with aging, the temporal lobe shrinks. That's a big surprise. I don't know why it is, but the hippocampus is in the temporal lobe, and the hippocampus is critical for episodic memory. So, of the three things, processing speed, executive control, and episodic memory, two of them are accounted for very well by just losing part of the brain. All right, so normal shrinkage and associated dysfunction. This is a normal brain, very full temporal lobe, and nice hippocampus. You get older, the hippocampus is blown out, everything is shrinking up. This is kind of a nice sequence, 1984 CT scan of the head. I know this is foggy and fuzzy, but everything I got here I kind of stole from the internet, so forgive the internet, I guess. But you can kind of sense that there is a full brain out here, but you get out 20 or 30 years, there's shrinkage that is evident in the frontal lobes. Okay, just to orient you again, frontal lobes, temporal lobes. And they're going to go bad as you get older, the vast majority of people. Yes, you're going to see a one person out of 10,000 that has a very normal architecture of the brain, but all of us, vast majority of us, are going to have shrinkage of this part of the brain. Okay, so frontal lobe and executive focus, function, focus, all right. And this is a long list of things that happen with the brain, and you can freeze that. And I'd want you to ignore the last one, which is processing speed, because I'm not really sure that I believe that. I have my own opinions about processing speed. But I do agree that the frontal lobe is responsible keeping attention. Okay, we're going to just do this. We're just going to go here. We're going to do this. Keep you very refined. I wanted to just give a shout out to the default mode network and the precuneus and cuneus. I know you came here just to hear those words, but I have, since medical school, since residency, always been fascinated by these parts of the brain, the cuneus and precuneus, because we have no idea what they do. So let me tell you a little bit about what I think is going on, and this is close to my heart because at WashU, Marcus Rakel is the one that developed this whole idea of the default mode network. In some respects, you might want to think about the default mode network as another way of keeping us focused. The default mode network is basically where you're at probably right now, unless you're actually listening. But the idea is that when the brain works, you have selected parts of the brain that go into action. But when the brain is not doing anything, it goes to this place. This is consumption of glucose. The rest of the brain is not doing anything. This is kind of the black hole. It's just sitting there. And this has a role because as long as you're sitting in here, you aren't activating and doing any of these focused areas of the brain. Yeah, another metaphor. All right, episodic memory. I hate this, I apologize, but forgive me, I do my best. Episodic memory, anytime people say, I'm having trouble with my memory, well, what do you mean by memory? Okay, so this is the usual psychological layout of what memory is. And there's short-term memory that's, just within seconds, blah, blah, blah. But longer-term memories, some of it are implicit, and those would be things like procedures, like riding a bike, all those type of things. Where we go into explicit memories are things like episodic memory, which is located with the hippocampus. And this is experiences in your life, time and place. Whereas the declarative, explicit memory that is just facts is actually in a different part of the world. So that part doesn't seem to deteriorate as much as you age, as does episodic memory. So you can't remember an event. Really? I was there? Okay, whatever you say. So anyway, semantic memory, again, is facts, whatever, 12 inches to a foot or something like that. Episodic memory is, oh yeah, I remember my daughter's wedding and, what people were wearing and things of that sort. So hippocampus is the site for episodic memory. This is the temporal lobe. The hippocampus is deep inside of there, and it deteriorates with aging. Okay, what is processing speed, you ask? Okay, you can take this home and enjoy this all day long, but this is the key. You have a U, and that means 3. And you have a diagram, thank you, and it's a 6. So now you just have to write out the numbers here. Okay, so I got okay, here's an X. Okay, so that must mean a 5. 5 goes here. When you're 20, you buzz through this. When you're 60, you don't buzz through this. Goes a lot slower. Processing speed. How long does it take for you to carry out the task? So this is, a little bit of a digression, but what isn't? What is the processing speed? Could it be just the fact of the white matter? Again, the brain is made up of neurons that spit off a little something to the synapse, which is then taken up by the dendrite, which is then conducted through the white matter. Could the speed of processing be a function of the white matter not working, or something wrong with the synapse, or how good the action potential here? Here's Selden's big idea, and I think this is kind of interesting. You see in older people the oxygen and glucose consumption not being as efficient as you get older. And I think that has more to do with vascular behavior as you get older. It may be a circular question. But anyway, I don't think we know what processing speed is, and I'm not one to say that it's purely a function of the frontal lobe. Okay, so how do we compensate? We start with very specific connectivity, and then as we lose the frontal lobe, we become less specific, but we de-differentiate. That is, we ask other parts of the brain to pick up the slack. It's not perfect, but it's okay. And now this is a very busy slide, and I'm not going to do all of it, but I'm going to emphasize that, hey, when I look at a waterfall, I get a particular part of the brain that lights up. Boop, boop. And that's where you perceive and understand, oh, that's a waterfall. Whereas if you look at a teddy bear, you get 2 different areas that kind of light up. All right? And that's the way you are when your frontal lobe is fully intact. But you see, hidden underneath, there is some emphasis of the waterfall into these areas of the brain and the teddy bear to this part of the brain. As we lose the frontal lobe, what you see is more of this kind of crossed information and less of the direct information. All right? It's differentiated, and more parts of the brain are using different parts of the brain. This is a single slide on something that probably takes a long time to talk about, but you will see in the literature conversation about cognitive reserve and resilience. And you can look at the slide all you want. Basic idea is that the cognitive reserve is just anatomical, speaking about your anatomy more than anything else in the structure. Whereas the cognitive resilience ties into education, nutrition, other types of things that affect behavior. The weird thing, and this is years old, that some people believe that this one small section of the left frontal cortex is key for your cognitive reserve. All right, so what can you do to compensate? I have to give the proviso ahead of time that animal studies and human studies are not the same. Likewise, correlation is not causation. And I'm inviting lots of controversy about everything I'm going to say here, but I'm going to give you my best shot. Directed mental exercise to address processing speed, episodic memory, and executive control is out there. We are bombarded by endless kind of computer programs that tout helping you improve your memory and your mind and everything like that. I do not want to diss that. I'm just skeptical. And I do know, however, that if you design a mental exercise program specific to your cognitive deficits, you might do very well. There's some evidence that that's the case. Aerobic activity, I'll talk about that more, but this has been shown over and over again, and likewise muscle building, and then WAMs or SWAMs, whatever you want. So let's talk about eating and aging, and this is a fascinating subject because it speaks about a longevity in a way, and I always just, this is going to be good for you to remember. If you don't want to get old, don't eat. No, that doesn't make any sense. But the idea is what you eat, how much you eat, when you eat, really does have an impact on aging. All right, there's this guy, and I got this wrong, I apologize. His last name is Longo, and it's the UC San Diego, University of California, San Diego. It's not USC, I don't think. Anyway, Longo is his name, and he's just written books, and it's fascinating. And he's experimented with yeast and worms and flies, all showing the same thing. If you reduce the amount of food they get, you trigger behaviors that affect the mTOR, where is that? Right there, which is key for cellular metabolism, the genetics, FOXO, and you reduce aging by dietary restriction. This was center of controversy between the classic University of Wisconsin and NIH trials, where they took monkeys and correlated caloric restriction. And clear cut, if they controlled their diet and didn't have as much to eat, they lived longer than the control monkeys that could eat anything they wanted, all the popcorn and potato chips and milk duds. But it's controversial. And I was fascinating. There has been, although I think it's starting to fade, the argument that if you survive a famine, you live longer. And there have been very structured trials to look at that. You can't structure that kind of, that's the problem. You can't structure the trial particularly. But I think that's still out there, that impairment in caloric intake early on can make a difference in your longevity. Anyway, anti-aging. I brought it up. Have fun. All right, but what to eat and what is the deal? So you've all heard of the blue zones. We've had talks here at Mary Greeley talking about blue zones. There are places in the world where people live a long time, routinely live over 100. And what is one of the features of all those cultures, the 5 blue zones, is their diet. And they basically eat fruits and vegetables and little fish. That's a picture of the Mediterranean diet. I chose this little slide on the internet that looks at this trial looking at cardiovascular disease with a Mediterranean diet versus a regular European diet. And yes, you live longer. I'm sorry, lives longer down here than the control diet up there. Or you have less cardiovascular disease. Anyway, there's countless articles that will speak to that. This is near and dear to my heart, which is sleep, and it's proving to be more and more fascinating. We all know dream sleep or REM sleep has a lot to do with memory and dreams, and it's weird. And probably your consolidation of episodic memories are key on the REM sleep, but it's the slow wave sleep which is key to glymphatic drainage. And that's just a new concept in the last 5-6 years. And the glymphatic drainage is basically clearing the extracellular space of the brain of all the debris that accumulates during wakefulness and with your brain activity. I don't know, this is me ramping on that, but anyway, the water channels fail as age and impede drainage. There's a lot of ideas. It's still getting worked out and figured out. But here's your picture to understand, and this is a nice picture. Please look at this picture. It's very easy. Here your brain is asleep, and the spinal fluid comes in, and with glymphatic drainage, you get a lot of metabolic waste out. There's your EEG, and it's slow wave sleep. Slow, slow, slow. 4 per second, large amplitude. All right. During wakefulness, boo, 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 you're real busy, 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 and you get very little metabolic clearance. This is an artistic representation of the lymph system of the brain, which just basically wraps around the artery, but also wraps around the vein. And there's movement of the fluid from the artery to the vein and out through this lymphatic system. Now we're going to talk about exercise. And I just kind of like to emphasize the fact that aerobic activity is different than weightlifting. And I think both are very helpful. I don't say that I understand all the metabolism of what goes on, but I'll tell people this one story, and I'll get to it in a moment. But the bottom line, if you look over here to the left, you have people that don't do any activity, aerobic or weights, and they got some new cells, those little red ones. But you get runners, and you get new cells, you get neurogenesis, okay? So exercise is good. Now I'll tell you the little experiment. I tell my patients this all the time. This one researcher took male mice and had them go through the effort of finding their way through the maze and timed them, and then took them all and taught them how to go up a ladder to get their food. And then he took half of them and put them with big backpacks, so it was very hard for them to get up the ladder to get their food. Well, they got up to the top, and they got their food anyway, but they built up big muscles. And then they had them all run through the maze again, and of course the ones that had big muscles got through the maze better. And he looked at them anatomically. They had more muscle, they had more nerve growth factor, but they had more neurons. Neurogenesis was created by lifting weights. That's the conclusion. All right, so how much should you exercise? Do 20 minutes a day, 2 hours a week. Try to have it intense, huff and puff, break a sweat. Any bicep curl, I was gonna bring here we go. We got this here. I'll just kind of do pump iron here like that, all right? Do that, 20 reps. You know when your muscle feels a little bit swollen, and that's a good thing. All right, socialize, enjoyable. All right, this is stock photo from the internet, but anyway, I think I know this guy, maybe not. But the point is, you want it to be a positive interaction. The last thing we want is elder abuse or going over to, or having your son or daughter come in and bitch at you and complain about you and things like that. And this is a study, I just gave you an article reference here that you can look at. Reduction in dementia in those who stay social. Last thing I hate to hear when I see a patient is, what do you do during the day? Well, I get up and get some breakfast, and then I go in the TV room, turn the TV on, and get in my recliner. That's it. The social interaction is very demanding. Very demanding. You have to look at their faces, you have to listen to their voices, and it's very good for your brain. All right. I think I'm kind of come to the end. So weights, aerobic, Mediterranean diet, sleep, social. If you want to put sleep at the top, you can have swams instead of whams. Okay? Anyway, it's been my pleasure, and if you have some questions, we'll try to address that. Hope I have not run too long. Well, good?
Oh, no one wanted any questions yet.
Well, they were all sleeping through it.
No. You know what I can do? I can give my end of the
Okay,
talk, and
all
then
right.
if we get questions pop up, we'll bring you back. How
Very
about
good,
that?
very
All
good.
right.
Thank you.
Well, we don't have any questions as of yet, but I'm going to wrap up. Oh, actually, here we go. Is alcohol, red wine in particular, good or bad for the brain?
Yeah, that's I should have tried to address that. I am of the opinion that it is good, but I'm not going to prescribe. Again, that's more derived from the blue zones. You'll see small intakes of alcohol being beneficial. Red wine, I think, is valuable as well, but the curse is always in moderation. I mean, I don't know what is useful for one individual versus another. I'd say 2 or 3 times a week and call it a day.
And I've also heard, but if you don't already drink alcohol, is
Yeah.
it beneficial to start?
No.
Okay. And then here's some more questions coming in.
Okay.
Is doing crossword puzzles a good thing?
Yeah, it's fine. You know, what it's working on, and it's kind of interesting to bring this up, that crossword puzzles draw on the part of the memory that is all about facts. And, language, words, facts. Episodic memory is what's going down, and it's not exercised in doing a crossword puzzle. I think this is a real thorny thicket, and kind of like everything else, if somebody comes in and say, what about Prevagen? I said, fine, I don't know, it's not going to hurt you, go ahead and do it. But as far as any benefit, I'm not, I think it's individual. And I think crossword puzzles, if nothing else, I think it gives you some sense of satisfaction. Likewise, playing board games or things of that sort. All right, and then what about turmeric? Yeah, I talked about that before, I think about 5 years ago. And I think I'm still interested in it. Mainly it's based on one interesting study that came from India, of all places, and they compared people that were eating curry versus not eating curry in India and the rate of dementia. And the curry eaters did not have as much dementia as those who did not eat curry. All right.
What is normal sleep?
Yeah.
Read the question.
Oh, I apologize. That's right. What is normal sleep pattern with seniors? And the normal pattern is ideally still 6 to 8 hours of sleep. I think what I would want to emphasize is that we always seem to be driven by cutting out sleep and degrading sleep. We want to look forward to sleep and worship sleep and enjoy sleep. And I think whatever number of hours that gives you is worthwhile. I have no hassle with napping. If you want a nap, go ahead and take a nap. If you go to the blue zones, that's pretty standard behavior. You have a 70, 80-year-old, you'll see them lay down for a snooze in the afternoon, and I think it's very valuable. There's probably a lot more that sleep is beneficial, and probably, I don't want people to get all anxious about it. If you think your sleep is terrible, then kind of look into it and think about trying to improve it. And we are just on the cusp of trying to get into a little bit more micro analysis of sleep and what would be helpful and what would not be helpful. All right.
I think
Ready?
Yeah, right here, but we got to open it up because we can't see the entire question. Tim, how do we?
I got it.
Here we go.
I had an MRI on my 74 age brain. They talked about white matter. Can you talk about that again? Yeah, I think, and I know probably what you're talking about there. This is one concept would be shrinkage of the white matter. Just like the gray matter gets smaller, the white matter can get smaller and more compressed. But the vast majority of the time that we're talking about white matter problems is because there's little punctate changes in the white matter. And sometimes we think about that as strokes, and sometimes it is stroke. Sometimes it represents just enlargement of the arterial passage and shrinkage of the white matter that way. So again, you're going to get in a lot of thorny issues, but in general, when you're talking about white matter, it is the stuff below the gray matter, and it's mainly responsible for passing messages right and left. And you want to have good white matter, you want to have good gray matter to the extent that you can.
He's highlighting it.
All right. To what does the prefrontal cortex regulate emotions in dementia patients? What causes a change in behavior? So the simple answer is, first of all, yes, the frontal lobe is key for emotion and behavior, and as it shrinks, that's a detriment to emotion and behavior. The target for the frontal lobe in controlling emotion and behavior is also the hippocampus, and not the hippocampus, but the temporal lobe in particular. And so it's the worst of both worlds. And again, it's not, and my experience in the clinic has been that you'll see it all over the place. You'll see some people with tremendous emotional impairment because of their atrophy of their frontal lobe and their temporal lobe. Other people, it's no big deal, or they're more aboulic or don't care, or there's a whole spectrum of emotionality. So I don't think there's anything that's it's going to be unique, but it certainly does happen. It certainly does. Okay, so if you take medication to sleep, is it as beneficial as normal sleep? What about multiple interruptions during the night to go to the bathroom? Yeah, I mean, I think very good question, and I think what works for you. And I get into lots of trouble with, we are all very well aware of medications on the market that are very, very effective, but in the long term, probably not that useful and troublesome for your overall health. I think I'm not really, I would prefer medications not be part of your sleep regimen, and if nonetheless you wind up getting up 3 or 4 times during the night, if you go back to bed and you fall asleep, no big deal. And that's just me talking, and again, you might get a different opinion from someone else. And always feel free to make it work for you. What works for you? All right, so the next one is neurogenesis from lifting weights, meaning that I think getting a 5-pound weight and doing 15 reps 2 or 3 times a week in each arm is a good thing. I don't want you going over and bench pressing 300 pounds. Don't get me wrong. I think some is worthwhile. I think it's a good thing. All right. Does all the talk about superfoods, foods like blueberries, affect brain health? I'd say yes, in general. I mean, I'm a believer. The problem is, and kind of like everything, it's individual, how well is that superfood absorbed? And how well or how much does your individual cells or your neurons need more antioxidants and things of that sort. But we do know that free radicals and those type of metabolic products are harmful for the cell long term. And so I can't guarantee you that your blueberries are going to get to the brain to protect the neuron, but I think it's okay to try. And again, it may be very individual, All right, we got them. Oh, and one more? What can be helpful in getting good night's sleep if your sleep pattern are erratic? Yeah. Oh boy, that's, I hope there's no night shift workers here, because that's a very huge controversy. We need people to work at night. We need people to do those difficult shifts, but hopefully it's not detrimental to their health. So when you say erratic sleep, I would be very keen to see whatever you can do to kind of stabilize your sleep. There's nothing better than your body having, and your brain having an expectation that, oh, well, the sun's down, I guess I'll go to sleep. Or the sun is up, I guess I better wake up. I think taking cues that are natural are very helpful. I appreciate people's duties and jobs cause demands, but just keep trying to come back with the normal pattern. Now, fully appreciate that some of our night shift workers are people that have shifts in their circadian rhythm such that they are night owls anyway, and so that's the way they were made, that's the way their anatomy is. So I think we got it.
I think that's all of them.
Well, thank you very much.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Spencer. Always very interesting and great information. And I listened very closely. I will take many of those tips into account and share them with many people. So want to remind everybody of other upcoming programs. We have 2 programs in July. The first one is Wednesday, July 21st at 2 p.m. on medication management, and Ellen Heikens, one of our pharmacists here at the hospital, is doing that program. And then the very next day, Thursday, July 22nd, we have a program, Taking Care of Yourself While Taking Care of Others, and that is presented by Valerie Bolin, our Home Health and Hospice Services Coordinator. So thank you for joining us, everyone. Thanks again, Dr. Spencer, and have a great day.